What's up, everyone? It's your boy Scott. Welcome to the Scott Report, and today we are looking at the man, the myth, the legend, the one and only Blade. So in this installment of Who Is, we'll be looking at his comic book origins, and we'll be also diving into his Marvel Rivals origins so we can see why he's involved in this battle. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look. So Blade's name is Eric Brooks, and it says half human and half vampire. Eric Brooks walks between worlds, craving the very life force of his enemies. As night falls, Blade's hunt begins as he wields the sword of Dracula to become the nightmare of any foe who dares to bare their fangs. So as always, it's open season on all suckheads. So with that laid out, let's go ahead and take a look at his comic book origins so we can know what he's all about. So, who is Blade? I mean, of course, we all know that Wesley Snipes is Blade. He is Blade. He's the one and only Blade. I mean, let's be honest here. Until that movie dropped in 1998, no one knew who Blade was unless you were really deep into comics like myself when I was a young lad. But before that movie came out, people didn't even know that Blade was a comic book character. Until you were paying attention and you saw that it was a Marvel film, and then it's like, oh, he was from Marvel? I mean, it might be some people who might remember that he was on an episode of Spider-Man the Animated Series in the 90s and he was going after Morbius. But let's be real. Let's give him his props. Wesley Snipes made this man the iconic character that he is today. So for that, we have to give kudos to the great one. But as far as his comic book history, Blade is a very niche and complex character whose origins and backstories and things of the like has been kind of scattered throughout the Marvel universe, and a lot of times his origins or the stories that you can tell for him are kind of weird. And for the sake of length of this video, I'll just be sticking to the essentials, like the things that you need to know who Blade is and what he's here to do. Blade was introduced as a supporting character in Marvel Comics in Tome of Dracula number 10 in July of 1973. This was also written by Marv Wolfman, who also created the Teen Titans, by the way. And even though he was introduced in that book, you really didn't get his origins until like much later because he was kind of just there. So, to streamline things and make it a little bit easier, we'll dive right into Blade's origins, and to be honest, the movie version would suffice, and it's actually kind of accurate as far as how Blade came to be, because it still involves Deacon Frost and what happened with his mother. So without further ado, Eric Cross Brooks was born in a brothel in the Soho neighborhood of London, England on October 24th, 1929. His mother was Tara Vanessa Cross Brooks, a heresy-seeking sanctuary with Madame Vanity, an agent of the Order of Tirana. When Tara experienced severe labor complications, a doctor was called in. In actuality, the doctor was the vampire Deacon Frost, who killed Tara by drinking her blood. However, this inadvertently passed along a certain vampire enzyme to her baby son, and he was born. Eric thus became part vampire, preventing him from being turned by a vampire's bite. Blade has also many times speculated that this is what gave him his hatred for vampires. Blade would spend the rest of his life hunting down Deacon Frost, much like how he does Dracula, to get revenge for being turned to what he is and to stop vampires from ruling the night. It also gives him his power set, which is very unique and very standard to vampires, but by him being what's called a daywalker, he does not have the weakness of being affected by the sun. So he has all of the benefits of a vampire and none of their weaknesses. Besides, he still has the thirst for hunger. Now, this is where things can get a little bit tricky at times because he does still have a hunger thirst. In the movie, we saw that he needed serum. In the comic books, sometimes he didn't even have the hunger. And I know I'm taking a huge jump ahead a little bit, but even in the most recent storylines in the Marvel Comics with the event story called Blood Hunt, which is loosely based off what they did in season 1 in Marvel Rivals, which was kind of weird for people like me to see the Fantastic Four be in the forefront for season 1 and not Blade, because that was literally the story that took place with Blade. with everywhere being drenched into eternal night with the vampires and things like that. But the Marvel Rivals team was able to weave everything together and make an interesting story with it. I know I'm jumping ahead. I know I'm getting off topic, but in that story, like at this point, I'm a little bit off, but I don't even think vampires overall have the same weakness to light anymore. But I could be wrong on that. I do have to read this most current series, which again, I said that things can get very complicated with Blade, which is why I'm trying to keep this on target and close as possible for what we need to read. I mean, overall, Blade spent most of his time trying to get vengeance on vampires, and in his upbringing, he was trained by various people in vampire hunting, in hand-to-hand martial arts. One of his mentors is actually the legendary Stick, who also trained Daredevil. And he's also aligned himself with a lot of people within comics. In the 90s, I know he was part of a team called the Night Stalkers with someone named Hannibal King, which was a vampire who you may remember from Blade 3, who was played by Ryan Reynolds, who is now Deadpool. And there was also another vampire hunter in that clique called Drake. He's been part of Midnight Suns. He's aligned himself with Doctor Strange many times in the comics, along with characters like Moon Knight, Punisher, and people of that like. He's always been a street level hero, so he was always around, Luke Cage, Spider-Man, Daredevil. He's just bounced around many different places within the Marvel universe. So it's kind of hard to get like a hard line story from him until recently. With his popularity shot up again, Blade was actually a member of the Avengers for quite a long time and was a very big part of one of their current stories. So he's been getting a lot more popularity. So maybe with that being said, they can probably get him and start adding a little bit more prominence to him, getting a more like of a streamlined story, which I will say again, you can just go off the movies. But his biggest power is that he is a daywalker. Blade has various type of abilities and movesets just by being a vampire. He is a very skilled martial artist and swordsman, as we know. He's highly knowledgeable about vampire lore because he is part vampire and he spent most of his life tracking them down. He has superhuman strength, speed, agility, stamina. He has enhanced senses. He has accelerated healing, almost similar to Healing Factor, but not the same. He is immune to vampire bites because he's already half vampire. You can't bite him and make him another one. I guess in some terms he could go full vampire. But also by being half vampire, he also has slowed aging and he has the ability to sense other supernatural creatures. So he is the perfect hunter for doing what he does. With this backstory detailed, you would be 100% okay with just jumping on with Blade as a character to where he is now in the comics. So let's shift over and take a look to how he got into the fight in Marvel Rivals. Next, let's dive into Blade's Marvel Rivals lore as we'll take a look at his background as well as his hero story. So Eric Brooks was born a daywalker, a half vampire after his mother was bitten by a vampire before giving birth. Gifted with supernatural abilities from his cursed bloodline and trained to perfection in combat, he became the ultimate vampire hunter, Blade. When Dracula seized New York, Blade was the first hero to challenge him. But armed with the chronovium gifted by Dr. Doom, Dracula easily defeated Blade and imprisoned him in a deep beneath his castle. After the curse of eternal night was lifted and Eric was rescued, he was sent to Wakanda for a long recovery, until Shuri awakened him, recruiting him as the sharpest edge in the fight against the All Black. So now, we'll go into his hero story. Eric Brooks' eyes opened for a moment and he wasn't sure if he was dreaming or not. But if this was just a dream, at least it was finally a good one after what seemed like an eternity of nightmares. And if it was really happening, well, it was almost too good to be true. There, in front of him stood one of the members of the Fantastic Four, Reed Richards. And what Reed said next, Eric would never forget. "Dracula's gone, Blade. You're free now." To be fair, Blade knew he'd never truly be free. He'd been cursed since the moment he was born with a hunger that only a fellow vampire could understand. But if Reed was right, if Dracula had truly been defeated, then at least Blade could finally rest easy. And that was a good thing because resting was about all that he had the strength to do these days. About damn time, Blade whispered as his heavy eyelids shut once again. But the darkness he faded into soon gave way to a rapid series of images replaying the events that had brought him to this moment. He didn't know if it was days, weeks, or months ago, but it all began when Blade heard a terrifying rumor that Dracula was planning to take over New York City and transform it into his empire of eternal night. As a vampire-human hybrid known as a Daywalker, Blade had devoted his entire life to bringing down the very worst members of his famed family, and there were none worse than Dracula. Blade went on a secret mission looking for leads about a mysterious ally who had been helping raise Dracula to his unexpected position of power. When his quest finally led him to New York, however, it wasn't long before Blade became Dracula's most wanted. Blade managed to carve his way through hundreds of undead soldiers, but he was no match for Dracula himself, whose powers had been enhanced by a crystal called chronovium. Even with Spider-Man and the Human Torch backing him up, Blade was still overpowered when the vampiric villain transformed into a giant bat and dragged the Daywalker to his doom. Since that day, Blade had been kept in captivity, subjected to dark magic experiments and relentlessly drained of his blood by Dracula. The Lord of the Vampires must have known that his empire of eternal night wasn't quite as eternal as the name suggested, so he was looking for ways to use Blade's unique hybrid blood to turn all of his minions into Daywalkers, in preparation for the time when his sun finally rose over the city once more. The process left Blade gravely wounded. He faded in and out of consciousness, only snapping back to reality when the pain was too much for his weakened body to bear. So it wasn't easy for Blade to know if Reed Richards was actually here to rescue him after all this time, or if it was just his mind playing tricks on him. After all, he figured he had lost his grip on reality quite a while ago, back when he started having deep conversations with a giant talking squirrel. But when Blade felt his weary body being hoisted onto the thing's rocky shoulders, he knew that he was finally safe. And while he would have given anything to have been the one who drove a stake straight through Dracula's black heart, he knew he had to focus on regaining his strength for whatever battle came next. Because if he had learned anything over the years, it was that villains can die, but evil never does. After taking Blade back to the Baxter building, Reed quickly realized that his friend's wounds were far too severe for him to treat alone. Fortunately, he had allies in the intergalactic empire of Wakanda who were far better suited to help Blade heal body and soul. Blade was transported across the stars via one of Reed's interdimensional bridges, arriving in the palace of King T'Challa and his sister Shuri. There, it was hoped that he could safely rest and recover while his fellow heroes took on the next challenge, protecting a living island called Krakoa from an invasion by Ultron and its mechanical minions. While the heroes were busy fending off the android invasion, Shuri decided to try unorthodox treatment to restore Blade's health. She had developed an experimental serum used to extract of Wakanda's sacred heart-shaped herb, the same precious plant that gave Black Panther his uncanny abilities. As it turned out, T'Challa had become a quasi-king of the vampires after failing to Dracula, so Shuri was already working on a more readily accessible cure for him. She thought this serum might be the key to healing this unusual outsider as well, even though doing so defied almost every imperial tradition she was raised to respect. The heart-shaped herb was usually reserved for the Black Panther alone, but desperate times calls for desperate measures. As soon as the serum passed his lips, Blade began to have visions far stranger than giant squirrels. In his comatose mind, he found himself walking through an endless field of purple, glowing heart-shaped herbs. It instantly reminded him of the stories that T'Challa told him about Djalia, the Wakandan astral plane. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind blew the leaves into the sky, where they formed a woman swirling with red and black energy, a spiral adorning her forehead. But a moment later, she morphed into an enormous likeness of Bast, Wakanda's beloved panther goddess. Showing respect to his divine host, Eric knelt and offered his thanks to Bast, but the panther goddess did not return the kindness. Instead, Bass lunged forward and clawed at Blade. Deep inside, Blade could immediately feel what Bass was doing. She was not assaulting him, but rather his vampiric side. He had heard legends that the heart-shaped herb could cure vampirism, but he had never been able to get his hands on any of the samples of the plant to see if there was truth to this story. But now, as this manifestation of Bass attempted to rip the infection from his body and devour it whole, he had reason to believe the rumors were true. As much as he wanted to be free from this lifelong curse, Blade refused to let go. He truly believed that he still needed his vampiric powers to help protect the world from those like Dracula, who would attempt to spread the evil and harm innocents. If it meant he had to fight a panther goddess to remain a daywalker, then that was exactly what he would do. Blade leapt out of the way of Bass' razor-sharp claws, narrowly dodging the beast's ferocious jaws as they snapped in his direction. He reached for the sword sheath on his back, but found that nothing was there. He quickly submerged that physical possessions must be unable to travel to his spiritual realm, which meant the man called Blade was without the very weapon that gave him his name. As he scrambled to come up with a contingency plan on the fly, Eric let his guard down for a split second. That was enough for his feline foe to make her move. Bass used a momentary distraction to strike a devastating blow, raking her claws across the daywalker's back. Blade howled in pain as he fell forward, landing on his hands and knees. The blood that poured from his wounds puddled on the fertile soil of the ancestral plane. For a moment, he wasn't sure he'd be able to get back up, but then he saw a reflection of a familiar face in the crimson pool. It was the face of his mother. When his blood mixed with the soil of the sacred realm, could it have summoned her soul? Eric didn't know for sure, but what he did know was that he had to keep fighting. For her. When the reflection of his mother held something out to him, Eric submerged his hand in the red liquid to grab a hold of it. He drew his hand back out and found a gleaming silver sword in his grip. Legend had it that Dracula's cursed sword was an extension of the darkness in the Vampire King's soul. If that was true, then maybe this new weapon was a manifestation of the light in Eric's, the parting gift from his mother. Pulling himself back to his feet, Blade raised his sword, ready to rejoin the battle. Bass snarled at the daywalker and prepared to pounce on her wounded prey. Almost had me there, kitty, Blade said, but you ain't the only one with fangs, or claws. Lunging into the air, Blade struck the phantom Bass with his new sword, causing the panther goddess's form to shatter into a million glowing leaves once again. As the leaves settled back to the ground, the brilliant purple hue faded to black. Blade watched as the leaves withered and died at his feet. He knew what this meant. Shuri's treatment had failed. The heart-shaped herb wouldn't cure him, but thankfully, it wouldn't take away his birthright. He would remain a daywalker. That is, if the day ever came where he could walk again. Until then, Shuri would need to devote even more time and resources to healing Blade. And she wouldn't have long until she would need to wake her sleeping champion, ready or not. There was a new enemy on the horizon, a darkness creeping its way across the galaxy, looking to snuff out every star, including the vibranium one at the heart of the intergalactic empire of Wakanda. That was a fate Shuri could not allow. As Shuri watched Eric peacefully slumber, she gently placed a long, tightly sealed package next to his body. Reed Richards had delivered it at the same time and had brought Blade to Wakanda. At the time, Reed had simply said that it was a trophy, but that Blade would know what to do with it when he woke up. Little did Shuri realize that the sword of Dracula was within the case, awaiting his new master. After all of the lives that this cursed sword had taken over the centuries, Reed believed that it was time for it to finally do some good in someone else's hands. And there were few hands trusted more than Eric's. Shuri stepped away, closing the door behind her in order to give Blade the chance to rest uninterrupted while she formulated a new plan. If she had stayed a moment longer, however, she might have seen a second sword with a shining silver blade start to materialize beside him. Though he was still in a deep slumber, Eric's mouth curled a faint smile, showing just the slightest glint of his fangs. And there you have it. Another installment of Who Is in Marvel Rivals is in the books, and I really hope you guys enjoyed the feature. Let me know what you thought of this video in the comments below, and I cannot wait to see you guys again for whoever we get in season 4. So with that being said, as I always say, you guys could be anywhere on YouTube right now, but you chose to listen to me, and I really appreciate that, so thanks for stopping by. On that note, it's your boy Scott signing out. See you soon.